What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the 2020 Democratic Iowa Caucus and the complete and utter debacle that this thing actually was. Now, unfortunately, virtually everything about this caucus and its results are shrouded in controversy. However, at the moment of me filming this video, what I'm able to determine, and I'm pretty sure that this will mostly hold going forward, is that there are two major winners of the 2020 Iowa caucus, and that is Bernie Sanders, who finished statistically in second place, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who by 1/10 of a percentage point appears to have finished in first place with 99% of the precincts coming in. Now, I want to be perfectly clear, these are the results known to me at the time that I'm filming this video. They could be subject to change. There's talk of audits, there's talk of double checking, yada yada yada, so they could be different by the time this video comes out or at some point in the very near future. But right now, the reason I say that both Sanders and Buttigieg are major winners is because winning the Iowa caucus really isn't about that 1/10 of 1% that Buttigieg is currently holding over Bernie. And it's not about the more people that showed up or appear to have shown up to support Bernie. It's about how the delegates are distributed. And at this moment, Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete Buttigieg appear to be tied from the delegates. So whatever other numbers you want to throw out, kind of irrelevant because they're taking away the same number of delegates. But separately from the technical reason why this is a victory for both the candidates that I mentioned, it also aids both of the characters of each of these candidates' campaigns incredibly well. Pete Buttigieg winning the Iowa caucus may give him the momentum going forward, or at least it's going to give the illusion that his campaign has the momentum going forward, which is what Iowa really does, because in the grand scheme of things, the number of delegates actually delegated by Iowa, not that significant, but the appearance of winning the first contest can sometimes be significant for a campaign. That's why so many candidates spend all that time in Iowa. That's why a lot of long shot candidates like Mayor Pete Buttigieg spend time in Iowa, because winning Iowa or appearing to win Iowa will get you some national recognition because our press likes that Cinderella story. Now, while Iowa helps Pete Buttigieg for the traditional reasons that winning Iowa helps candidates in Pete Buttigieg's position, the fact that the results were botched in the way that they were, the fact that the Democrats contracted out a company called Shadow Inc. to develop the app for the first time and basically tested it live for the first time in the Iowa caucus helps Bernie Sanders immensely, because Bernie Sanders supporters like to be seen as victims. They like the narrative that Bernie and them are against the world, and anything that can throw shade on the process, anything that can give the illusion that Bernie Sanders is being cheated, helps rally support behind Bernie Sanders and makes him stronger going forward. Now, I've rehashed the 2016 Democratic primaries numerous times on this channel, and I've explained that while it is true that the Democratic Party was definitely against Bernie Sanders in 2016, while it is true that the Democratic Party was committed to Hillary Clinton, and in terms of being a neutral arbiter, they failed in that regard, Bernie Sanders did not lose because the Democratic Party rigged the process against him. In fact, the long drawn-out process of the Democratic primaries helped Bernie Sanders, who had almost no name recognition when the thing started, actually become competitive with Hillary Clinton. At the end of the day, whatever you want to say about Democratic Party shenanigans, media shenanigans, the DNC shenanigans, Bernie Sanders got 3.5 million less votes than Hillary Clinton. The superdelegates were in no way, shape, or form a deciding factor in the 2016 Democratic primary. Bernie was unable to build momentum in the 2016 Democratic primaries because the 2016 Democratic primaries features a number of early southern states where 2/3 of the Democratic electorate are African American. Bernie got crushed by Hillary Clinton in terms of black support. That's why he lost. That's just the reality of how 2016 went down. But fortunately for Bernie Sanders supporters and anybody obsessed with a victim mentality, people who are vulnerable to conspiratorial thinking, being tethered to reality is not a prerequisite for commenting on things that you don't understand. And a perfect example of this is this absolute gem of a clip from Kyle Kalinske.
The first article I see on turnout is hours later, and they say record low turnout. Record low turn. See, now you're putting me in a position where I know somebody's bullshitting me. And it's either you or my lying eyes. Now, you could say, well, what do you really know about the size of the caucuses? And it might seem big, but it's not big, and maybe you're reading too much into it, and you're only seeing pro-Bernie accounts and this and this and that. Listen, son, listen. They maybe could have snuck by me average turnout if they wrote an article saying, hey, it's about average turnout. I'd be like, okay, it looked kind of big to me, but maybe I'm wrong and it's average. You're not going to sneak by me low turnout. That's not happening. That's not happening. All the evidence I saw on social media was the exact opposite.
Now, according to Kyle, who is definitely on board with the conspiracy against Bernie Sanders, the fact that people are talking about how the turnout was low in Iowa is somehow part of the conspiracy. Kyle would have accepted average Iowa turnout, but low, not with the videos that he saw. He saw some videos and that looked like a lot of people. Therefore, the overall count of Iowa is not lower than average for some reason, because that's legitimately how he thinks this works. Now, even though it should be perfectly obvious to anyone who just watched that video of Kyle Kulinski asserting that his subjective view based on videos and photos of Bernie Sanders supporters in Iowa somehow is better and more accurate than the people actually conducting counts of who showed up in Iowa, is completely ridiculous and absurd on its face. There were actually people replying to me and my friend Stephen Michael Davis, who shared this video on Twitter, saying, well, I actually looked it up, and it turns out that the Iowa caucus count wasn't that dissimilar from the Iowa caucus count in 2016. And to be fair, based on the estimates that I've seen, they're both at about around 170,000 to 172,000. But the 2016 Iowa caucus is not the standard. In fact, the 2016 Iowa caucus was also a lower than average year. In 2008, when Iowa had significantly less people, 200,000 less people in the state, to be exact, 240,000 people showed up for the Democratic 2020 caucus. So yeah, when you have fewer people show up in 2020 than did in 2016, despite the fact that 2016 was a two-person race, and 2020 has a much broader field, and the last time you had a field almost as broad as the 2020 field was 2008, where 70,000 more people showed up, despite the fact that that state's population was much lower in 2008, yes, that's record low turnout. There's 2 million registered voters in the state of Iowa, so less than 10% of them showed up to caucus with the Democrats. Of that 2 million, 600 plus thousand of them are registered Democrats, which means that less than a third of registered Democrats showed up to caucus. Nah, but who cares about facts and information when you can just speculate based on photos and videos you saw on social media? Now, another thing that just shows you the pure and unfiltered ignorance of leftists, and specifically Bernie Sanders supporters, was the outrage over this coin flip video that appeared on Twitter, which was apparently a secret rule from the DNC so that the Democrats could steal for Pete Buttigieg, a Bernie Sanders delegate.
Tails.
There you go.
You get the delegate.
Now, this clip went far and wide across social media, and Bernie Sanders supporters reacted to it exactly the way you would expect them to react to it. A combination of anger based on their own ignorance. And if you scroll through the replies, it's actually quite depressing, because there are a ton of content creators in the replies to these tweets that have content that I either enjoy or have enjoyed in the past that have been sucked into this Bernie Sanders victimization complex. You have H3H3, some black guy, Chris Raygun, and I'm pretty sure I saw Shoe on Head somewhere in there. All of them making the case that this is some sneaky, tricky DNC rule meant to rob a delegate from Bernie Sanders. Now, of course, the mistake that they're making here is that they're cherry picking. Coin tosses are not uncommon in the Iowa caucus. In fact, in 2016, 13 contests were decided via coin toss, because that's what they do when they end up in a statistical tie and there's one delegate up for dispute. If you actually decided to look into this instead of crying that Bernie Sanders lost a delegate in this instance, you would find other instances where Pete Buttigieg lost a delegate to Amy Klobuchar. You'd find instances where Elizabeth Warren got a delegate over on Pete Buttigieg. You'd find an instance where Pete Buttigieg won a delegate over Biden. And you'd find an instance where Bernie Sanders, via coin toss, won a delegate over Joe Biden. Now, if the coin toss was a last-minute rule just made up on the spot only in instances where you could take something away from Bernie Sanders, then Bernie Sanders wouldn't have won the coin toss. There wouldn't have been coin tosses in disputes that had nothing to do with Bernie Sanders. And the coin tosses wouldn't have went so randomly to other people. If Buttigieg would have won more coin tosses, he probably would have had a bigger delegate lead over Sanders. But that's not how it broke down, because coin tosses are things done based on chance when there's a statistical tie and a delegate in dispute. Also, another thing that really bothered me about the way that this tweet went viral, aside from the fact that it was cherry-picked to promote a victim narrative for Bernie Sanders and his supporters, is the idea that the coin flip is the thing that runs amok over democracy. That the coin flip is what makes this an undemocratic process. We're literally talking about a caucus. One of the reasons why I said Sanders got more people to show up and not more voters is because a caucus is not a primary. There's no voting. Unlike a primary where winning means you got the most votes, in a caucus, the way that you win is to have people show up and stand around for a couple of hours and hope at the end of the day more people stood around for you than did the other candidates. A caucus is inherently undemocratic. Iowa is among the highest in voter registration in terms of per capita numbers. As I said earlier in the video, the Democrats have over 600,000, almost 650,000 registered voters. A lot of these people who took the time out of their day to register would likely show up to vote in a primary, but they might not have the time to show up and stand around for hours to do an Iowa caucus. So the idea that the undemocratic nature of having coin tosses decide disputed delegates somehow undermines an undemocratic process like the caucus is completely absurd. But it's actually even worse and significantly more obnoxious to hear these complaints from Bernie Sanders supporters. Because you know what the big advantage somebody has going into a caucus? Their ability to draw crowds. So the caucus system is inherently democratic, and it also provides Bernie Sanders a significant advantage over the other candidates, because as Bernie Sanders supporters like to point out all the time, Bernie is good at drawing crowds. In fact, one of the major reasons, if not the biggest reason, that Bernie Sanders was even competitive with Hillary Clinton in 2016 is because Bernie Sanders performed really well in caucuses. Because again, this undemocratic process advantages Bernie Sanders because he's an enthusiasm-based candidate. I mean, honestly, there are few supporters of any candidate throughout American history more obnoxious than Bernie Sanders supporters. They're so ignorant that they don't even realize that Bernie tying Buttigieg in delegates and having Buttigieg with this technical 0.1% advantage over him is literally the best possible outcome the Bernie Sanders campaign could have ever asked for. Remember earlier in the video when I pointed out that Bernie Sanders' loss in 2016 was due to the fact that Hillary Clinton had significantly more black support in the early southern primary states? Well, you should, because Pete Buttigieg being the victor for the establishment portion of the Democratic Party hurts Joe Biden more than any other candidate and makes him the biggest loser of the Iowa caucus. Why does that matter? Because Joe Biden's biggest base of support is black Democrats, meaning if he had taken Iowa, or at least finished competitive in Iowa, he would have momentum going into those southern states. Pete Buttigieg, conversely, has no black support. Like, statistically, the man is polling at 0 to 1% among black voters. So if you're Bernie Sanders, you should be popping champagne bottles for Pete Buttigieg's victory in Iowa. Because whether you think that victory is legitimate or not, whether you think that it was stolen from Bernie Sanders, the media is rallying around Pete Buttigieg, and they're pronouncing the Biden campaign dead in the water. Biden is the biggest problem for Bernie Sanders in the area of the country that's the biggest problem for Bernie Sanders. Pete Buttigieg is a non-threat in that exact area. If Biden had won Iowa, there would have been no question that he would have been the establishment's guy. And with his advantage in the early Southern Democratic primary states, the primary process would have ended in Iowa. The media would have rallied around him, and establishment candidates would have started feeling the pressure from the Democratic Party to drop out and back Joe Biden. You've been blessed with the split in the establishment vote. Now stop crying about it. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Iowa. Let me know your thoughts in the comments of this video. If you like this video, then show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me with one-time donations on Venmo or PayPal, monthly Patreon Subscribe Star, Teespring Store. Till next time.